Every child in school knows that the Germans wrongly jailed millions of non-combatants during World War II in a network of concentration camps spread across the Nazi sphere of influence in Europe. To say the least, the conditions in these camps were horrible. Every prisoner had to deal with disease, hunger and murder on purpose for the months or years they were locked up there. What most people who won the war don't know is that the Allies also put together another program to intern and kill a lot of German prisoners at the end of the war. In the summer of 1945, they took in millions of German prisoners and, according to the highest estimates, deliberately starved up to 1 in 4 of them to death. Historians then hid and muddled the story of the Rhine Camps, or Rheinwiesenlager, for decades after the war, while the survivors got old and the prisoner records were thrown away. Rheinwiesenlager, last moves of a lost war. It was clear that Germany would lose in the spring of 1945. From the west, millions of Allied troops poured into the Rhineland. In the east, the German SS and Wehrmacht put on frantic last-ditch efforts in Vienna and Berlin to stop the Soviet Red Army ahead. As these talks broke down, German General Jodl stopped talks about a ceasefire to buy time. At the same time, up to 3 million German soldiers left the Eastern Front and walked across Germany to surrender to American or British troops who they thought would be less angry than the Soviets who had won. The number of Germans quickly reached so many that the British stopped taking prisoners, saying it was too hard to handle. General Eisenhower of the United States then threatened to have his troops shoot any German soldiers who turned themselves in, thinking that the soldiers were only doing it to delay an official, eventual total German surrender. This made Jodl officially give up on May 8th. But more inmates kept coming in, and they all had to be processed before the US Army decided what to do with them. The Army then came up with a way to deal with a lot of undesirable people that was similar to what the Germans did in Poland. They took over big areas of farmland and put barbed wire around the prisoners until things could be sorted out. So, in Western Germany, in the late spring of 1945, dozens of big holding camps popped up. By early summer, they were full of German prisoners of war who were still wearing their old, worn-out uniforms. Army officers picked out prisoners who looked suspicious, like SS members and men with blood group tattoos on their arms, which was often a sign of SS membership, and sent them to intelligence officers and war crimes inspectors to be looked at more closely. While this was going on, officers told regular soldiers in the Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine they could just sit down anywhere on the ground until someone higher up told them they could go home. That's what they thought. A new status for prisoners. The Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention of 1907 have strict rules about how prisoners of war should be treated. If an enemy soldier is caught wearing their country's dress, they cannot be tortured or killed. They can't be shown off or made to feel bad in public. They also can't be stressed or punished for no reason. The conventions are very strict about what they say. For example, every prisoner of war must be fed and kept to the same level as their guards. And the agreements say that if it is not possible to heat the barracks for the prisoners, then the camp staff should not have heated barracks either. The American Army took these rules very seriously, more so than any other World War II power. At one POW camp, guards had to sleep on bedrolls on the ground for the 3 days it took to build prisoner dorms, even though their cabins were already finished. Millions of defeated Germans came to the Western Front because of America's reputation for being fair. This possibly cut the war short by a little because fighting men chose to be captured instead of killing themselves in battle. The Germans who gave up didn't know that General Eisenhower, with the help of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1943, had already planned to use Germany's inevitable weakness after defeat to make it impossible for that country to ever again fight a war. At the Tehran Conference in 1943, Roosevelt and Stalin reportedly raised a glass to the idea of killing 50,000 German officers after the war. They might or might not have been serious, but early in 1944, Eisenhower put Everett Hughes in charge of planning the surrender. In the summer of that year, Roosevelt and Churchill both signed off on a plan for the end of the war that was made by Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, Jr. It was called the Morgenthau Plan, and it was more than just a punishment. Germany was to be split up into occupation zones, its industries were to be destroyed, huge reparations were to be paid, and large parts of its people were to be moved against their will in order to completely destroy Germany's ability to go to war. By today's standards, it was almost a plan for national slaughter, because millions of Germans would have to die of hunger or move in order for it to work. Hughes fully supported the Morgenthau Plan, but he was watchful after the bad press that happened when some of the plan's details were made public in October. Hughes wrote a note to Eisenhower on November 4th asking him to keep information about inmates' food as top secret. "I agree, Eisenhower." Widespread mistreatment. Hughes was interested in rations because of a legal difference he and other people on Eisenhower's staff had made. They chose to not call Germans who were captured prisoners of war, but instead called them disarmed enemy forces, DEFs, which was a completely made-up term. Given that the men were DEFs instead of POWs, they would not be protected by the Geneva Convention. Some people said that the American forces wouldn't even have to feed their prisoners, and that the Red Cross couldn't officially check out their Rheinwiesenlager camps or send aid. With their new legal standing, the defeated German soldiers would almost become non-persons. They were already in a bad spot, but things got even worse when the remaining German politicians were arrested in Flensburg. The veterans didn't even have a government to speak up for them anymore. They could not do anything and were completely dependent on the US Army. There is only one reason to take away the law protections that protect war prisoners from being mistreated, and that is to treat them badly. Other Losses, a book written by Canadian author James Back in 1989, says that between 800,000 and quite likely over 1 million prisoners died in American-run Rheinwiesenlager camps in the summer and fall of 1945. After being looked at by the Surgeon General's office, the conditions in the Rheinwiesenlager camps resembled Andersonville Prison in 1864. Even Stephen Ambrose, the world-famous historian and sometimes employee of the Eisenhower estate, who was hired by the late president's family to investigate the book's charges, admitted in a 1991 New York Times article, there was widespread mistreatment of German prisoners in the spring and summer of 1945. Men were beaten, denied water, forced to live in open camps without shelter, given inadequate food rations and inadequate medical care. Their mail was withheld. In some cases, prisoners made a soup of water and grass in order to deal with their hunger. Men did die needlessly and inexcusably. Denial and subversion. The bad things Ambrose would say about the Rheinwiesenlager camps are just the tip of the iceberg. Before letting men who were marked as DEFs into the camps, Allied troops would usually strip search and question them. A lot of the time, the American or British officers who were questioning the Germans staged them to make the Germans, who were usually hungry and tired and had not slept at all, think they were on trial for their lives and could only save themselves or their families by confessing to the crimes they were being asked about. Most of the prisoners were put in barbed wire cages and left there by officials. They were rarely given food or water, let alone clean clothes, and their only protection was any hole they could dig with their hands. Men who went up to the outer fence to beg for food were shot because they were thought to be trying to escape, but those who didn't could easily die of typhus, cholera, or other diseases that were common in the Rheinwiesenlager camps. People in Germany who were also short on food and the International Committee of the Red Cross both sent what they could. The ICRC was still simply turned away by camp officials who told them the DFs had plenty of food without their help. The guards never said they were hungry, so it's possible that some of the food packages were given to French citizens near the border. No one seems to know what happened to the civilian food packages. The men in the camps didn't get anything, and they started to die quickly. There are no records that show how many German soldiers died in the Rheinwiesenlager camps. When the war was over, the army said it was impossible to keep track of millions of prisoners, so they didn't bother with any specific paperwork. It turned out that the army did keep records on the men, but that about 8 million of them were thrown away when the camps closed. The other losses column of the army's records is the closest thing experts have found. It shows that there were differences in the weekly prisoner count of up to tens of thousands of men who were missing from one head count to the next. This other column, which gave Bach the title of his book, didn't include escapes and releases, nor did it include most prisoner transfers. Because of this, there is no official account for where hundreds of thousands of deaths went during the months that the Rheinwiesenlager camps were open. In what they thought was a hypothetical question, Ambrose's team harshly criticized Bach's work and asked where those 1 million dead bodies went, since it must be hard to hide 7-figure death tolls in the Rhineland. Still, today, no one knows for sure the answer to that question. However, since 1945, the French and German governments have made it illegal to dig in big parts of their borderlands where the camps were located. The official death toll from the US government is only between 3,000 and 6,000. At the end of the war, the US Army occupation troops set up these no-go areas. They were used for unknown reasons all through 1945, and then they were closed off for good because they were war graves. There are places where you can't dig, and it looks like no one has ever dug there. The historian's question may still be hidden under the trees in the Rhine River Valley. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.